again. I am going to pretend like I'm seeing all your faces because it just helps me not feel like I'm talking to a screen. I am a very touchy-feely person, so I do like to see real faces. So I'm just going to pretend you're sitting right here in front of me and we're sitting at your kitchen table, because that's maybe where you are right now. So welcome back. This is part 2 of, actually, what did we call this? Parenting tips and tools to reduce toxic stress. So welcome back. My hope is that all of you saw part 1 or were with us in part 1. And the first thing I want to do is ask you how your house is doing. We did an activity early on in part 1 where we used the metaphor of the self, all aspects of our very complex self as a house, and us being able to kind of focus on the interior of our house, ourself, to get connected to how we might manage or respond to this thing called toxic stress. So I had given you some homework, which were the top 10 things or 10 things I do to manage my toxic stress. So my hope is that you completed that homework, which was a list of the top 10 things that you do to manage or reduce your toxic stress. Those things should be proactive and then also reactive. So proactive, like what are the things I'm doing every day to get stress and or toxic stress out of my body and mind. And then reactive, in the moment when my house is on fire. Remember that big fireball that's coming that hits the house? In the moment when I'm in the throes of toxic stress, when my heart rate's increased and my respiratory rate's increased and I'm in the state of fight, flight, or freeze, I have stress hormones that are swimming through my system that create energy, survival energy. So I might feel like I need to run or hit something, or because that's just what happens to our bodily system when we're in an alarm state. So that toxic stress response, we need to be aware of and attuned to in ourselves. In the moment, knowing then what to do to get that stress, which really are stress hormones, and this alarm state, to discharge the energy it's created and move ourselves back down into calmness. That doesn't just happen magically. We actually need to be actively doing something to discharge the toxic stress, or our bodily systems can stay in an alarm state for hours, days. And this becomes really important for ourselves as parents because emotions are contagious. So parent stress can quickly become child stress and vice versa, right? We can quickly absorb child stress. But we as parents have much more ability, of course, to regulate, and we have many more coping strategies. So we wanted to be able to really put what we did last time into practice, because, you know, I can do a whole hour training, but if you don't actually make it really specific to what you heard and what you need and those 10 things, and then put them into practice, we don't really get to the effect that we want to get to, right? So the experience of being able to help ourselves learn to regulate better, we're already helping our children regulate better, because the primary way all children learn is through imitation. Like if you throw everything else out that I've said, children primarily learn through imitating. They're watching their grown-ups. It's less about what we tell them to do and more about what they're learning by way of what we're showing them to do. So also think about this in terms of stress, and especially toxic stress. So there, our kids will largely do their distress and their emotions and their regulatory skills largely the way that we do. So I wanted you to kind of anchor us back into what we did and your house, yourself, because we're going to move all this forward as now we talk about this thing called attachment. And what I'm going to be doing relatively quickly, because those of you that did part one, you remember that I'm a little behind, so I have to walk us through pretty quickly the attachment system, caregiving system, because this is where toxic stress lives inside the relationship between parent and child. It's why it becomes so important that we strengthen our abilities to regulate ourselves and then have tools to help our children learn how to regulate better. But childhood trauma and our own traumatic experiences can get in the way of us being more effective in reducing our stress and then, in essence, helping the child reduce their stress. And we're going to end today with going into some EQ skills, what we call emotional quotient skills. And I'm going to end with our kind of 3 parenting tips and give you lots of resources along the way. So you guys ready? Got your cup of coffee? Ready to go? So I want you guys to do this with me. I don't know if you remember this last time. I think I started with this as we're going to talk about attachment. Because the tendency is for folks, including parents, grown-ups, and professionals, we tend to simplify this thing called attachment. We tend to equate it with love, like attachment is the same as love, right? And I'd have you go like this, hold up your hands. Love is like in between here. See this space? Like love is very nice. But attachment, I want you to pull your hands out, out, out as far as you can get them. Attachment is this. Love grows out of, within, and through the attachment experiences. So we learn love, but attachment is much more broader and much more comprehensive in terms of the actions, behavior, styles, and then in essence what it does, especially for brain development. So we're going to differentiate between love and attachment. So attachment, and I want to give you a wonderful way to hopefully think about attachment and give you also a tool at the same time to be using with your kid. And by the way, it doesn't matter if it's a biological kid, a child in foster care, a child that was adopted, really any kid that you're the everyday parent. So you could be the grandma, but you're the everyday parent. You are the primary attachment caregiver for that child. And when we say primary attachment caregiver, I want you to imagine that as the primary attachment caregiver, your job is to meet the developmental and attachment needs of the child. If you're in the primary position, the child every day has needs for attachment and development. And we're going to break that down a little bit, but I want us to, again, it's why it's different than love, because you may get a child that you just got in your home 2 months ago. And what a lot of folks don't get right away, in particular if they've not fostered or adopted, is we don't attach right away and we don't love right away. You don't often have those loving feelings if you just got into your home a 12-year-old child that you don't know and doesn't know you. Loving feelings, hopefully unconditional love, comes from unconditional commitment to their needs, commitment to their attachment needs. It's why this thing called attachment is so important. So a book that I'm going to already recommend, it's one of my favorite books, but it really will help us kind of talk about this thing called attachment. And it's called The Invisible String. And The Invisible String is this beautiful book really about attachment. But I want to show you kind of what it, when you're doing it with your child or reading it with your child, you can get a piece of string, and this will help us kind of understand also attachment disruptions. So I want you to imagine that if I'm the parent, I have one end of the string connected to my heart, and the other end of the string is connected to my child's heart, the child that I'm attaching to. So when the child has a need on the other end of the string, when the child has a need, they tug on their heartstring and the attachment caregiver comes towards that need. These are very different than wants. Again, like I want ice cream for breakfast and I want to play video games, or I want Lucky Charms, or those are wants. I'm not saying we meet all of a child's wants, but our job is to meet their need states. So when the child tugs on their heartstring, the attachment caregiver comes in a predictable, consistent, and loving manner. That attachment consistency and that parent meeting those needs over and over and over again set up the attachment caregiving system that hopefully is secure, because the caregiver has been responsive and loving and attuned to the child's need states. Okay, you guys following me? That's really important. Children that have had disrupted attachments, I want you to imagine that the string got cut. If they've had one mother, two mothers, three mothers, four mothers, and the string kept getting stuck, they may struggle with this thing called attachment. Like, I don't want any more pain, so I don't pull the attachment caregiver towards me to meet my needs. I don't even cue the attachment caregiver what I need. I may be very emotionally shut down or oppositional and defiant. I'm not really learning this dance of attachment, because all of our attachment behaviors, our attachment styles, are learned. We learn attachment, and we're learning it from the moment we come into the planet. We're learning attachment primarily through the attachment dance of our caregivers. And attachment is all about emotion. It's about the emotional quality of that serve and return relationship. Some of us grown-ups, some of us parents, had suboptimal attachment experiences. We might have had an angry or abusive parent that was critical and shaming, or an alcoholic, or that used to hurt us, physically abuse us. When there's trauma within the caregiving system, you get a suboptimal pattern. And I'm not going to go into great detail about those patterns, but I really want us to think about the co-regulation that occurs within the attachment system, because that's really important. It's why, again, attachment is much more than love. So when we're talking about this attachment caregiving system, the first 3 years of life for the child, the right hemisphere of the child's brain is growing to 90% of its capacity. Really, it's the limbic system, it's the emotional centers of the brain, which is again why the attachment caregiving system is so important, because it's really the job of the caregiver that when the child's in a state of distress, remember that state we talked about last time of hyperarousal? The child goes into distress when they're young. Their heart rate increases, their respiratory rate increases, they're crying, they're screaming, they're dysregulated. By the way, the mind state becomes very disorganized and overwhelmed, and they have minimal capacity to return back to baseline or homeostasis. They need outside-in regulation, or else their little system, their brain in particular, is experiencing significant amounts of toxic stress. And toxic stress can get wired, or does get wired, into the neurobiological system of the child. It gets wired into the brain and body. So toxic stress is really the enemy, which is why we have kind of what we're trying to do is kind of kill that myth that is still permeates our culture, that babies don't remember, they'll forget. And it's just not true. The brain always remembers. In fact, the brain, again, the baby brain is growing up to 90% of its capacity and growth, especially in primary structures that manage emotion, that manage regulation, that allow us to learn to return to baseline. So small children that are exposed to significant toxic stress, prolonged stress, often carry with them internal anxiety, distress, hypervigilance, hyperarousal. Their brain and body is in a chronic alarm state, which is kind of the enemy of development and learning. Can they learn and relearn how to find baseline? Yes, but they learn this outside in, meaning they learn it from their caregivers. They need co-regulation. So again, why this invisible string becomes important, that when the child tugs on that heartstring when they're in distress, they need a caregiver to be responding to help them regulate back into homeostasis. So it really is co-regulation that child needs initially, which is why our house, ourself as the parent, becomes so important. What is our emotional state? Because if we come towards the child and we're in distress, we could be adding more toxic stress to their internal state, which is why the very first part of what we need to be doing when we're in the throes of toxic stress is manage ourselves, manage our toxic stress. It's why I started with those 10 things, because those become really important. I'm laying some foundation here in terms of attachment and brain development. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I did give you this great handout. At least I think it's great because it's got that wonderful picture of the brain that I love, and it breaks down attachment. So you guys in your handouts have a nice kind of cheat sheet on attachment and brain development. But the thing that's going to help us when we get to the to-dos that I really want us to kind of have us think about is that those early experiences for all of us, not just for children, but for all of us, it is experience that is the architect of the brain. So sensory experiences shape the child's brain, shape the limbic structures. And you may say, Allison, why is that important? Why is highlighting experience? Because many parents end up talking at a kid to try to get the child's behaviors to change. Like we use words, talk, don't do that, stop doing that, we talk. That's not experience, that's talking. That is not experience. It actually doesn't change the brain. It doesn't change their behavior. So I want to help us parents. This becomes really important because when we're talking about healing from developmental trauma, children need sensory-oriented experiences to change the parts of the brain that were negatively impacted by toxic stress or trauma. So it is the experience that you provide or pull them into that's actually going to get to the change that we're seeking. So that's not a small piece, it's actually a really big piece. So we're going to be talking about experiential learning. So it's not just telling the child, do this, don't do this, or go relax, go to your room, or go to timeout. Those things don't create experiences that actually activate and teach the brain something new. Again, experience shapes and reshapes the developing brain. So we're going to be really talking about how to create experiential opportunities that really get to the deep change that needs to occur to reduce toxic stress. So hopefully you guys are with me. You have this in a handout, and I'm not going to go into great detail, though really if I had 3 hours on attachment, we'd be talking about attachment. And I lay this foundation because I really want you guys to feel how important you are. That the parents play a critical role in teaching the child not only how to minimize their experiences of distress, but also how to start thinking differently about themselves. So if you have a child that thinks she's bad, or that he's damaged or broken, or there's something wrong with me, or has really poor self-worth or self-esteem, that gets changed through the healing relationship of a primary attachment, secure relationship. So it really will be our ability to create that healing connection with a child that they end up learning. I'm sorry, my string is stuck. That they're learning to do the dance of reciprocity, that when they have a need, they can put that need out there to you, like I'm scared, or I'm lonely, or I think I'm stupid, or I think I'm bad, and they can put those needs out there, and you can come and meet those needs to do the reparenting that's necessary to help reestablish a healthy primary attachment relationship where they can both receive nurturing love and then give empathy, be nurturing, feel confident, feel proud, feel a sense of value, a sense of self-worth. So that happens within and through the primary attachment relationship. So how amazing is that? So remember when I said the first 3 years in particular, I just want to draw your attention to this slide. The first 3 years, if you starve the brain of experiences, think attachment experiences, because little ones, their brains need a tremendous amount of stimulation. And where are they getting that stimulation but through attachment? It's the parent that's providing all of that healthy, age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate stimulation. All the rocking and the holding and the singing and the cooing and the play, the interactive play, all of those experiences are growing the brain. The absence of those experiences, I'm showing you extreme neglect. This is the brain on extreme neglect. And when we say neglect, what I would really have you think about is it's really the absence of attachment. It's the absence of you, of primary attachment. So think about how critical and important your role is as the parent, because you're providing all of those experiences that help teach and shape the child's brain and mind. No little task. Really, the job of parenting is to help create the development or enhance the development of the human mind. It's pretty profound. So I want to walk you relatively quickly through adverse childhood experiences. Those of you that this is a familiar term, I'd have you, and you may have already seen some of what's out there on adverse childhood experiences, but I want to highlight it for a second because it's not only relevant about the children you're parenting, but also for ourselves, because many of us as parents have ourselves experienced adverse childhood experiences. And what we know and have learned is that what happens in childhood doesn't stay in childhood. Again, it's building a brain and it's building a self. So there are lingering effects of adverse childhood experiences, and it's helping us to redefine childhood trauma because of this thing called attachment. So for instance, historically, we've thought about trauma as being, childhood trauma as being, you know, I was molested or I was abused, I was physically abused. We have to be able to expand that and include, has my caregiving system, my attachment caregiving system been negatively impacted? Meaning if my mother was an alcoholic and my father was in prison and my grandmother was mentally ill, you know, my ACEs score now is a 4. And that's not a small ACEs score, because my attachment needs, if my primary attachment caregivers are depressed or have mental illness or are addicted, my developmental and attachment needs are getting minimized. So it's really helping us think about the lingering effects of childhood trauma. So there are 10 ACEs, so you get a score of 1 to 10. It's pretty easy to take. And I'd have, and I don't want you to kind of do that now, but I want to give you kind of the data and why this becomes so important, because these aren't little small issues, because they impact our body over time and our mind and the quality of our relationships. If I have an ACEs score of 4 or more, I'm 7 times more likely in my life to become an alcoholic or dependent on drugs. And if you think about it, and again, this data is really clear, that if I had so much childhood trauma, that now I've internalized so much toxic stress into my body and mind states, that one of the things that I want to do most of the time is numb, because I'm in so much pain. So it's also helping us think about how we're managing our group of adults, or working with our group of adults that struggle with addiction. That really the gateway drug is not a drug, the gateway drug is trauma. That if I've absorbed so much trauma, childhood trauma, again, now it's in my mind state and my bodily states, I'm in a chronic state of alarm, I'm in pain all the time. So our ACEs score, if it's 6 or more, I decrease life expectancy by 20 years. Imagine that. You take 20 years off your life with an ACEs score of 6 or more. And we have adults that may not know their ACEs score and the effects of early trauma on the body and the mind, and the lingering effects. An ACEs score of 7 or more increases suicide attempts by 3,100. I know, it's amazing. So so I wrote an article called, I don't think I gave it to you, but it's called The Lingering Effects of Childhood Trauma. It's on my website. It's a nice kind of concise 3-page article, and it's got 2 links inside that article. One is for the ACEs Too High that Julianne just put in the chat bar. The other is to a TED Talk by Nadine Burke-Harris that I strongly encourage all of you guys to watch. It's probably the most powerful TED Talk there. And again, you can either Google it or go on my article. And by the way, the article you can print out and use it. It's actually a great resource for professionals and parents to be using, because it's not only about kind of childhood trauma, but we have to be addressing adult trauma and the lingering effects. So knowing our ACEs score as a parent really helps to empower us, first of all, to forgive ourselves for absorbing so much toxic stress, because what we often find is parents that beat themselves up. Like, why am I agitated all the time? Or why am I yelling all the time? Or I said I wouldn't do this to my kids. Or like, we've absorbed so much internalized distress, and maybe we have had poor modeling around coping strategies, that the more aware we become of this thing called ACEs, the more ability we have to manage those skills and develop better coping strategies. So I show you these visuals just to show you this beautiful thing called secure attachment. Attachment should look like this. And if you're able to see these beautiful pictures of attachment, what you'll see is that, first of all, humans aren't the only ones that attach. And that the primary job of the parent in each of these pictures and with us is to be the buffer against toxic stress. So for instance, in any of these pictures, imagine that there's a big lion coming or a cheetah coming. The parent's going to very quickly circle around the child, pick the child up and run. Again, to reduce toxic stress and threat. That really the primary goal is survival. And the parent's role is to play a buffering effect for the child. And it is that proximity. Do you see the beautiful proximity? The closeness allows the child to feel safe and secure through attachment. Children don't feel safe and secure on their own. They learn that over time, but it comes through the attachment relationship. So adverse childhood experiences, you see this little boy hit his mind and hit his heart, hit his emotions. So at a time where children are really supposed to be, if they don't have trauma, without trauma, learning how to live and how to play and hit all their developmental milestones, if children are exposed chronically to toxic stress, they're not only not learning what they should be learning in relation to their developmental milestones, they're learning survival strategies and how to defend against and cope with toxic stress. The challenge is they pay a big price for diverting their energy into survival versus being able to thrive and accomplish all of the developmental milestones that a healthy attachment relationship would be providing for them. So when I talked earlier, I might be going a little too fast, but I am kind of tracking my time. So when I talked earlier about bottom-up healing, remember in the first one I talked about we can't go top-down. Top-down, many parents try to go through the thinking brain with their child, talking at their child. Top-down, I'm going to talk at you and you're going to change your behavior. That never gets to the brainstem and the limbic system, which is where trauma and toxic stress live. Again, toxic stress lives in brainstem and limbic system. Toxic stress lives here, not in the thinking brain. So we as the parent could be using strategies and interventions that aren't effective. Maybe they were effective with your parents or maybe not. Because children aren't learning, especially kids of trauma, through a top-down approach. And the parts of the brain that need tending to, that actually need to learn how to regulate, how to find calm and how to bounce back after distress are in the brainstem and the limbic system. So our parenting interventions, how we're kind of living day to day and responding to stress with our kids, need to attend to brainstem and limbic system. So when I say bottom-up approach as the parent, we're going to be tending to those lower brain systems because that's really where regulation occurs. And by the way, for all of us, we had to learn how to regulate. Those skills didn't just kind of come from the sky. Like, we actually have to learn those skills. If we've learned them, then we're much more able to model those for our children who, remember, are learning through imitation, but we can also teach those skills. And remember, all of the teaching we're talking about is experiential. It's not through talking. It's not through just saying, do this, don't do this, why are you doing this? Children don't have insight into their behavior. So talking to kind of their thinking brain in moments of distress are often ineffective and tend to frustrate us. So the parts of the brain that we want to get to, and you guys do have this on here, are again the parts of the brain that are red, our brain stem, which is here, our limbic brain, which is blue here, our emotional centers here, and then our prefrontal cortex, where our thoughts are, language centers here. But the areas that we're trying to impact are really here, the lower brain systems. So the bottom up healing, the bottom up activation, it's actually those parts of the brain have to be activated to learn and relearn. So it is our limbic system, which becomes really important when we're having to kind of think about children that are overexposed to prolonged distress or trauma or multiple attachment disruptions. Their limbic systems are in chronic distress, so they have trouble accessing thinking brain. And that can be true for us too. So there's good news. You guys want the good news? One of the things I always try to do is not kind of present a problem or a challenge without presenting then like, so what do we do about this? Because there's really great news in this. That individuals, both children and adults, can always increase their EQ, which remember is here in our brain stem, learning to bounce back from stress, find baseline and homeostasis, and learn to identify our feelings, talk about our feelings, allow somebody else close to our feelings. Not easy to do, but we can learn and relearn. And the earlier or the younger we catch children, the better. Because again, once I've practiced maybe defending against attachment or not letting anybody close, if I'm now 15 and I've never been securely attached to anyone, you can imagine it's harder. Versus if I'm 5, it might be much easier. So we're always modeling our EQ. So you're going to hear me going back and forth between the child's EQ and our EQ. We're always modeling, even if I'm just talking about, hey, I'm kind of grumpy today. You guys got any ideas for mom today? Because I'm feeling kind of grumpy. 3 bad things have already happened to me today. Can somebody cheer me up? I might be modeling this out loud, not just saying, oh, you guys need to, behave better or act better or, stop being grumpy. That actually I'm modeling my EQ for my kids. So when I say EQ, EQ stands for emotional quotient. I want to spend a second and talk about how difficult this actually is. Most of us grown-ups tend to overestimate children's ability to talk about their feelings, identify their feelings, express their feelings, and then know what the hell to do with their feelings. And by the way, this is hard for many grown-ups, let alone children. So I'd have us think about children need to learn the language of emotion. How do they learn the language of emotion? Because emotion lives in my bodily state. It actually lives in my sensory experience. So when I talk about the feeling, and I'll use an example, when I talk about the feeling of anger or being mad, that's a core feeling. Every human on the planet experiences anger. But how did I come to know this thing called anger? As a small child, an infant, a baby, a toddler, I had to first feel in my bodily state anger. Like I had to feel it first. It's an experience before it's a word. I had to feel anger in my body. And my hands, the blood gets shunted to my hands and my face gets red and I get tunnel vision because I can't think very well when I'm angry. So in anger, I have a physiological response. Then over time, somebody teaches me the word connected to that. Oh, that's anger. Allison, you're angry. Oh, you're angry because your sister took your toy. Now I can go, oh, I feel angry. And there's a why. Oh, I'm angry because she took my toy. It takes very complex processes to do all of what I just described. Because I feel anger in my brainstem first, my body first, I feel it. I have to get all the way to my language center, remember, which is in my prefrontal cortex, to find the word anger, to say the word anger. I'm angry. that takes me being able to have my brain states integrated, my triune brain, the 3 different parts of my brain integrated. That is no easy task. Most grown-ups struggle with that task. Going inward to identify our feeling, being able to put words and language to that, which takes my language receptors. So I typically can't do it well if I'm in distress. So again, I want you to kind of hear the complexity of how we increase emotional intelligence, both for us and for our children. Not an easy task. So one of the things I'd have you guys do, which is really fun to do, if your goal is to increase EQ both for your child and for yourself, is to take this slide. And by the way, if you can't print out the slide, just Google feelings color wheel, print it out in color, and put it on your fridge. And children, start with the feelings just on the inner circle. Stay very basic. Looks like you're feeling scared. Looks like you're feeling sad today. Sad looks like this. Looks like you're feeling mad right now. We want to first model and teach them the language of emotion. And especially for children of high trauma, we have to every day be pulling the language of emotion into our relationships, into our home, both for us. So mom or me starts putting words to my emotions, like I'm feeling angry today because the house is a mess, so who's going to help? Where I start putting words to my emotions, so I'm just not acting out my emotions, and kids have to guess, which isn't helpful because we want them to be able, especially for our kids, because they have so much more trauma and traumatic losses. They may have lost parents and extended family and their culture and their history and their lineage and siblings and their dog, and think about what our children have lost. They have so much pain that they've absorbed, and if they can't learn to talk and express it, that pain just gets locked into their interior, into the inside of their house. So it becomes more important that parents who are parenting children of high trauma and loss teach them the language of emotion, of expression. And then on top of that, where are they expressing this? In attachment to people they love and trust. So I gotta move a little more quickly. So when your child goes into distress, there are 2 tasks. Remember I talked about the string of attachment? When they experience anger, which by the way can be a stage of grief, it often is a stage of grief. Our kids are often stuck in anger because they have so much unresolved grief, loss, and pain. So sometimes we think of the angry child as the bad child. The angry child is the hurt child. So that one of the tasks of the parent is to strengthen the attachment relationship, unconditional attachment, so the child doesn't have to earn attachment, because the angry or hurt child may struggle with attachment. So having a parent be able to see where the anger and where the hurt really comes from and move towards that, yes, hurt and anger, move towards it. So when that child tugs on that heartstring, it may not look like they're saying, oh, come close to me because I want to be loved and, you know, I've been so hurt. They're not saying it like that. They may be saying, you're not my mother and get away from me and I hate you. And because again, they're children with a fear-based mindset. So we have to be able to, as parents who are parenting kids of high toxic stress, understand their distress and their emotional states in a different way. So toxic stress in children, and most of you guys are kind of living with this, so this will just be a confirmation like, yes, this is my life, get re-triggered through daily experiences of distress. These are children that can be experiencing on their attachment dance floor fear and terror states, feelings of abandonment and rejection. They have a lot of anxiety and angst around, you're going to leave me, when are you leaving me, and you're not coming back, and a lot of distress around attachment because they've been left or hurt through the experience of attachment. They experience regression. They may be chronologically 8 years old and emotionally in times of distress can regress and look like they're 2 or 3. And by the way, this emotional regression isn't a bad thing, because in that moment when they do regress and they're in a heightened state of distress, you have an opportunity to get into their limbic structures in a different way. So when that veil of distress is open for the child, it's when you can create new experiences connected to attachment that can re-establish a new pattern of attaching. So your responsiveness to their toxic stress becomes really critically important. Our ability to read and attune with what do they need from us? Again, not what they want, but what do they need from us? So for children, let's say who are, I'll use that chronologically, they're 8 years old. That number 8 tells us how long they've been on the planet. It doesn't tell us whether or not all of their developmental needs were met through attachment. So when we talk about developmental needs, I just want to give you a way to think about this, because we can often frustrate ourselves or even frustrate the child by overestimating where the child should be. So we may say things as the parent like, well, you're 8 years old, you need to be acting like you're 8 years old. For children who've had, let's say, 5 years without their primary attachment needs being met, if they were in foster care moving and moving and moving, or had trauma and abuse through attachment, relational trauma, they've had 5 years of suboptimal experiences that have left each of these 5 developmental areas, the needs in those buckets unmet. So think physiological development, social development, emotional development, cognitive development, and conscience development. So if they've had minus 5 years of healthy, responsive, attuned attachment, and by the way, just because children are in foster care and their basic needs for getting food and clothing are met, it doesn't mean they're in a secure attachment relationship. There's a kind of a myth around thinking that they've had their needs met. And you may be catching a child again who's 8, but they've had 6 different homes, 6 different mothers, 6 different sets of parents. That's not a primary secure attachment. That's abandonment and rejection over and over and over again, which is how the child experiences it. So you have frozen buckets. So it's often confusing for parents, because they will often say like, well, what were those folks teaching you over there? Why didn't they teach you any of these things? Remember, children are surviving, treading water when they're not in a secure attachment. And secure attachment relationship means you're never going to leave me. You're not letting go of me. You're not rejecting me or abandoning me. We hold on to things that we love. So helping a child move into relational permanency, a secure attachment relationship, is really the key. So again, if you get that child who's 8 years old, but they had 5 years of disrupted attachment, those 5 areas, those 5 buckets have been minimized. So you're going to get a child who's chronologically 8 because they've been on the earth for 8 years, but that doesn't tell you where they are developmentally. So doing a thorough developmental screening and understanding where that child is in terms of their physiological development. Can they regulate? By the way, that's red bucket, that's physiological development. One of the earliest things we learn, and we learn it really in infancy and toddlerhood, is how to regulate, how to return back to a state of calm after we've been upset, right? Returning back to calm, that's physiological development. I have to first learn how to regulate my body. Again, think social development, emotional development, actually pretty complex. So kids with developmental trauma have more needs. And for parents, the way that I kind of want us to be thinking about this, it won't be about punishing that child that has had suboptimal development. So again, if they're 8 years old chronologically, but now regress and get distressed and have minimized these developmental areas. So emotionally, they can at times act like they're 2 or 3 years old developmentally. They're giving you a window into their historical trauma and what didn't occur or neglect. So we read the child's needs as clues or hints as to what their needs are. And we want to be able to focus on what we're adding into each of these areas versus what we're taking away. So using parent strategies that aren't based on principles of loss, like you're acting like you're two, so I'm going to punish you, go to your room, because that doesn't add anything into these areas that catch the child up developmentally. And really, that's what the child needs. It actually needs experiences adding into these areas that actually catch the child up. So if we're engaging in these interventions as parents, we increase the likelihood that tomorrow when my sister takes my toy, I'm not going to kick her, but when my sister takes my toy, I know what to do. I can stay regulated in my red bucket. I can access my thinking brain, my cognitive skills, and I can manage the emotional distress I'm feeling and problem solve that event. But if I don't practice those skills in, I can't get to acting and behaving differently. So if you just punish me for having emptier buckets because of the 5 years of trauma or distress that I had, you're not increasing the likelihood that I can catch up developmentally. So we're going to use a very different way of kind of parenting the child, not based on principles of punishment or loss. And the reason this becomes important is because most of us were parented based on principles of loss or punishment. When we did something wrong, our parent punished us or were angry about us or yelled at us or sent us to our room or did all the traditional things trying to change our behavior. And that usually works, by the way, for children of non-trauma because they're securely attached. They haven't had 5 years of missed having their developmental needs met. So we're talking about very different, be like comparing apples to oranges. It's why our kids have very different needs. So learning, connecting, and healing. So helping the child change their internal working model. Can I really let someone close enough to help me heal and fill my buckets, add to my buckets? They have to learn a new dance. Remember I talked in part 1 about a healthy, secure attachment dance on our dance floor. If your needs have been met and you can do this, remember our string, pull somebody close to meet your emotional needs and then meet the needs of other people. That feels really good. That's secure attachment. But what if this is what you hear? How do I learn a new dance? So it's very possible to help our children learn a new dance, but it really depends on what the parent is doing on their attachment dance floor with the child. So what I was just referring to in terms of traditional parenting looks like this. And I say this because we've probably been doing this about 80,000 years. It's not new. We've been using punishment, fear, distress, punishing mistakes. We've been doing this for a long time, using anger, yelling at kids, reinforcing the disrupted cycle, go away from me. If this is attachment, parent-child, go away from me, go to your room, go to timeout, go away from the attachment caregiver and fix your behavior and then come back. So we punish the mistake. Normally, this is not a huge deal unless you're talking about our kids who, first of all, are not attached. They're not securely attached to us. So when our parents try to use traditional parenting, like go away from me, go to your room or go, our children typically aren't motivated to fix what we call the reparation. There's a rupture and a reparation. Our children aren't motivated to do the reparation in attachment. They're usually like, good, send me back, take me back to Orangewood or take me back to the shelter or call my social worker. I don't want to be here anyway. You're not my real mother. You're, I only laugh because it's really common because we get frustrated and distressed, but the child is not securely attached to us. So we have to be, as parents, engaging in interventions and behaviors that strengthen the attachment relationship. Yes, while we're disciplining and filling developmental buckets. And by the way, it's very doable. We just have to switch away from this notion that we're going to punish mistakes, punish the child for having needs that were never met, because that's usually the dilemma, what we call the attachment dilemma. The parents get stuck in punishing the child's distress. So we're going to be focused on what we're adding experientially. Remember, the child's learning through experience. We're going to replace our anger with empathy. and mistakes are really going to be okay. And I don't mean okay like we let them slide. In fact, you do not want to let mistakes slide. Mistakes, the child's mistakes, are communications about what their needs are. So we want to be really going, oh, I know what my child needs. And we're developing consequences, teaching consequences around those need states. And we do practices and redos that replace punishment. So if my child kicked his sister because she took his toy, he'll be practicing that desired behavior 5 times until he gets it right. So each day he might be practicing 5 times what to do when your sister takes your toy. Because, by the way, remember how complicated it is? First, he has to stay regulated and be able to use his words. By the way, a lot of us parents go, well, use your words. And when we're distressed, again, my red bucket, if my red bucket can't regulate, I can't find my words. I'm just yelling and screaming. That's why I have to practice. So again, when I say practice, it's that we can experientially activate parts of the brain where the learning needs to occur. So we're activating the red bucket and the limbic structures when we're doing practicing 5 times what to do when your sister takes your toy. Because if we just sent the child to his room, there is no practicing, there is no learning, and there is no reteaching the lower brain systems that actually need to do the learning. So the limbic brain has to be activated to learn and change. So both for the child and for us, there are kind of 4 branches. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail. You do have an article that or a handout that I created for you called Emotional Intelligence, and the back of it's called Increasing Your Child's Emotional Intelligence. But again, just to help us see how really complicated this is, first of all, these 4 branches, when I have to perceive emotions, like my own emotions, how am I feeling? If I don't make space and calm things down, I may not really ever connect to how I'm feeling. Sometimes I have families, and this is a great tool to make, if there's too much chaos in the home, too much loud talking or yelling or chaos, or I have parents make a no talking stick with the children, like you make basically a no talking stick. So the no talking stick can be pulled when any of us can be pulled out, like you make a stick and you put, it's a no talking stick, can be pulled when the stress is getting so high in the family that nobody can hear their own thoughts. And children have trouble calming down when they can't hear their own thoughts, and we have trouble calming down when we can't hear our own thoughts. So while it may sound easy to say, well, just perceive your emotions. Well, I can't even perceive my emotions if everybody's yelling and screaming and it's so loud and chaotic. So a no talking stick is a great tool to use when it gets too loud and we just need to say, okay, I'm pulling the no talking stick. Now there's just music for the next 15 minutes. So we're not going to talk, and we're going to circle back and then solve the problem once everybody's calmer. The next branch is facilitating thought. The ability to generate and use emotion, the interplay between our mind state, what I'm thinking, my stream of thought, and my stream of emotion. Because usually there's a dance between my stream of emotion and my stream of thought. So my thoughts can make me feel something, like I can have a repetitive stream of thought. Let's say I'm upset about, I'm in conflict with my mother or my brother, and I just keep replaying what happened over and over again. I can generate more negativity. I can generate more distress or more sadness or more anger by replaying something over and over again. And vice versa. I can go chase a positive thought or a positive memory, or watch something funny, so I bring more positivity into my mind state and my affective state. The next part is understanding emotions. One's emotional knowledge, how I use my emotional intelligence, my emotional attunement to other people that might be in distress, including my children. How do I read and attune with my spouse or my partner or my child? What is their emotional state, and am I able to read and attune with what they need, and vice versa? Can they read and attune with what I need? And then emotional management, managing emotions, the ability to modulate, Just manage our states, going from high states of distress, like my red bucket if I'm distressed, and learning to regulate, decrease distress. If I need more joy, more calmness, more laughter, more love, more connection, how do I wake up and plan for that? Can I wake up and go, you know what, it's been a stressful day, or this is the anniversary of when I lost my mother, or Mother's Day is always hard for me. What can I do to help manage my emotions? But if I don't understand my emotions, if I don't perceive emotions, you can see that my EQ may be decreased. Those of you that want to have some more fun with this and figure out your own EQ score, first of all, there's a great book, one of my favorite books called by Daniel Goleman. It's called Emotional Intelligence. His original book is really wonderful. And you can go online and find EQ tests to get your EQ score. And it can even give you areas where you can strengthen. Like maybe you're great at perceiving emotions, but managing emotions is harder. So they'll give you strategies to have an awareness about areas of strength and areas of challenge. It's fun stuff to work on. So when we're talking about reducing toxic stress, one of our overarching goals is to increase EQ skills, both within us and within our children. So the very first thing that we want to be able to do is get that mistakes should be encouraged. Mistakes should be welcomed. So both my mistakes and my child's mistakes. So I'm going to wake up and maybe at the breakfast table say to my kids, you know, everybody makes mistakes. And today, mommy's allowed to make 5 mistakes. And you guys are allowed to make at least 12 mistakes. And what do we do when we make mistakes? Well, we just have to fix them. So if I get really upset and yell at everybody today, that's my mistake. Then I'm going to say, hey, you guys, I'm sorry, I yelled today, and I'm going to do better tomorrow. I'm going to take a walk and calm down when I'm angry. Being okay with our mistakes, being more forgiving of ourselves, and then modeling that for our kids and allowing them to make mistakes and then fix their mistakes, we're just creating a learning environment that's very welcoming of mistakes and not punitive. Because really on every stage of development, we're all going to be making lots of mistakes. And it never helps us to beat ourselves up or demean or sometimes inadvertently shame kids for making mistakes. And we can do that inadvertently. Whenever kids are feeling worse about themselves, if I'm yelling or why did you do that and you're not acting your age, or whenever I start to go into demeaning a child, and by the way, many of us this is how we were parented, the child feels worse about themselves. Whenever a child feels worse about themselves, they don't behave better, they don't act better, they act worse and worse. It's often my belief about self. Am I valuable? Am I lovable? Am I worth holding on to? It's my belief about self that usually gives me confidence and pride, and I act better when I feel better about me. We're going to talk in a minute about structure in the home, although I have about 10 minutes, so I do need to move through. I want to make sure I get to a nice summary where you guys have to-dos, okay? So toxic stress, I'm going to revisit this brain piece for a sec. Toxic stress, I want you to see one of the things that it does for our brain is it kind of flips typical development. So the typical development triangle that you see, the very bottom of that, survival needs are supposed to be met right away. And I want you to think about for early childhood development, that's toxic stress. When toxic stress is minimized or removed right away, children can very quickly go to the next primary thing that needs to be learned, which is regulation. Which is, again, remember brainstem and limbic structures. First 3 years of life, they need to learn how to regulate from the inside out. And they learn that by being co-regulated from the outside in. It is attachment that teaches regulation through co-regulation. So when those earlier needs have been met, they can then move to the next one, which is the social emotional learning. Well, now they can learn how to play nice and make mistakes and say I'm sorry and have real empathy and learn the give and take of social and emotional relationships. And then cognitive skills. This is usually, you know, our prefrontal cortex comes online about 5 or 6, and this is when we're sending kids off to school. and they can do much more cognitive kind of thinking oriented things, because this is where in our prefrontal cortex we can do sequencing and planning and learning our ABCs, and then learning to put it all together and learning to read. And we do more complex learning because our prefrontal cortex is now more activated, but it takes regulation down here to stay on, meaning I have to stay relaxed. Removing toxic stress allows the triune brain, all three parts of the brain, to stay integrated. When I'm distressed, I'm here, so I can't learn very well. So for children, learning to regulate first then optimizes the thinking brain. You'll see in developmental trauma, the triangle gets inverted. So the longer the child stays in survival or toxic stress, the longer they stay not knowing how to regulate their internal states. They stay in high states of distress. So social emotional learning is minimized, meaning we're just going to see more behaviors from them. And then cognitive skills, thinking skills are also minimized. They have trouble thinking through and planning for, like making good choices and learning from the mistakes they made yesterday. You may find them making the same mistake over and over and over again because they're stuck here in heightened states of distress without learning to regulate. Again, it's why using attachment-based parenting skills are really important, because those punitive parenting styles will keep children stuck on the other triangle or on the inverted triangle. So to-dos, actually my timing is pretty good. I want to anchor us into to-dos. So you guys have some articles that'll help you with the to-dos, but the number one to-do is to put on my oxygen mask first. And literally I mean oxygen, because if I can't be regulated from the inside out as the parent, oxygen actually allows our prefrontal cortex to come back online. If I'm not oxygenated in my prefrontal cortex, my voice sounds different, my body's different, I'm angry, I'm agitated, I'm talking fast, and I can't even access my wisdom. Because you know, all the learning you've done and all the classes you've done and all of your experiences and you know, all of that wisdom is in your prefrontal cortex. And when you're distressed, all of your wisdom is oxygen deprived, so it's not accessible. So really important to keep our thinking brain on. So we put on our oxygen mask first. So when my body and mind are integrated and regulated, I can really have more choices about what's the best way of intervening with my child who's really distressed right now. Am I doing my 10 things to nurture my body and my mind, to proactively release the toxic stress, and learn to regulate when I am here? In fact, if I do get here, one of the best things I can do is say, okay, everybody, mommy is really mad right now. So I'm really upset right now. I'm going to take good care of myself. So don't come in the next 10 minutes because I'm making tea. I'm going to go take a walk, or I'm and by the way, usually your kids appreciate that. Like, yeah, go get unmad, go regulate, get yourself in a better place. And we do better because we're able to intervene, accessing all of our wisdom. So really attending proactively to our body, mind, and emotions really helps us stay regulated and be optimal. Not that we're not going to make mistakes. Remember, I get to make 8 mistakes every day as the parent. But a distressed parent cannot help their child de-stress, because remember, emotions are contagious. It's me as the parent that's setting the emotional tone in the home. And if I'm able to stay more regulated, the child can more easily mirror a regulated state. De-stressing the home environment. So I made you guys an article. It's called Tools for Families During COVID-19. And it really helps us kind of be thinking about let's say you walk into your home and think about what you see. Is it basically relatively well organized? That becomes important. If it's too chaotic and things are everywhere, and you know, it can feel, it's harder to stay calm when things are really disorganized. This can be true for the child's room. Sometimes we find that our children's rooms are tremendously disorganized if we just leave it up to them, or disorganized if we leave it up to them, because often people's environment mirrors their interior. So for children who come from chaos or distress, you can see that their rooms over time become really chaotic. They need more help in external organization that over time allows them to move into internal organization. What are the sounds in the home? Use music, use rhythmic music, because our ears need to anchor into a rhythm to find calmness. So proactively be thinking about, what's the sensory experience I get in your home? When I was in residential, one of the things we did, and here's your nose, is we would bake cookies frequently, 2-3 times a week. We would be baking chocolate chip cookies at night. And the children would love to have chocolate chip cookies at night, but it was also so the smells in the home felt like home. They felt loving. Or we use lavender in the home. Think about touch. Some of our kids need weighted blankets or deep hugs, deep pressure, wrestling. They actually need to feel deep touch. Light touch can be aversive and overly stimulating. So again, just thinking about how to maximize structure in the home, meaning we have predictable meal times, predictable bedtimes, predictable play working into our day. The more children, especially of high toxic stress and trauma, can predict what's happening next. Children do need to be able to go, oh, it's breakfast time and everybody gets at the table at breakfast time, and then we do this and then we do this. The more predictable and less chaotic it feels, the less it would mirror their chaotic history, or, oh, we're moving again. Those anniversary reactions that are triggers for our kids. Structure and predictability in the home will help them feel contained. The more any of us, and this is what's been stressful about many of us because our routines have been thrown out the window, that we have to now create a new structure and predictability so we feel in our bodies safe, that we feel contained, that we're creating predictability. For our children, it's even more important that we're able to do this. So we're thinking about a warm, relaxing sensory experience, and we're thinking about structure and predictability. That every night, one of the things we did with our boys, one of the things we did nightly also, so we got a break and saved our sanity. So we did every night, bedtime was 8 o'clock. And if you did your routine and shower and reread books and we're in your bed by 8 o'clock, brushed and ready for bed, you get an extra half hour for reading time. And that was just to help the mind transition into itself. So children have to go into their own mind when they're even reading or looking at pictures, and listen to their own thoughts and mind states as they're reading. Not on a screen, because that can be too stimulating, because what we're trying to get them to do is wind down into a sleep state. But their body has to move into relaxation to fall into sleep. So again, the retraining that we're doing is really important. So thinking about how you can set up the structure that most helps optimize even their sleep-wake patterns, because our kids need a lot of REM sleep. Many of our kids don't get near enough REM sleep, deep sleep. That's when the mind and body is growing the most, in REM sleep, that rejuvenating sleep, and that's true for us as well. So making sure we're tending to our sleep-wake patterns is important for us too. You can use the family stress thermometer. I have you guys post it on your fridge. It's a fun tool that I created. So everybody in the house can kind of speak the same language about, where's our family stress thermometer? Hey, if you have a 5-year-old, hey, 5-year-old, tell me where our stress level is. Oh, we're at a 2, we're at a 4, everybody's yelling. What do we need to do? And you come up with your family de-stress plan. What are the things we need to do to de-stress, to take ourselves from a 4 down to a 2 or a 1? And each time you can rotate who gets to pick. Sometimes the 3-year-old gets to pick, sometimes the 15-year-old gets to pick. But you're making the family stress a we event, so everybody helps in understanding stress in a different way and actively working to decrease the stress in the home. And the last to do, to strengthen the EQ skills in the home, we want you to be thinking about bringing the language of emotion into the home. It's one of the very best things you can do for yourself and for your child. We need to be speaking this language of emotion. Stress, toxic stress, creates emotions. Lots of times it creates the heavier, darker emotions like frustration or irritability or anger or even meanness, right? We can get really distressed. So we need to be able to express and emote this. Those are very sophisticated skills. I have to learn to label and identify my emotions, and then be able to understand the emotions that are being triggered in my children. And then not just what's getting triggered, but then what do we do with those feelings? What do we do when I'm upset, when I'm sad, when I'm angry, when I'm grumpy? That all emotions, that whole color wheel, are normal. Our kind of goal is to make sure that we're learning healthy ways to express and emote. We're all going to feel pain. You know, we're all going to lose throughout our life. We're going to have traumatic losses. I was saying earlier, it's Mother's Day. I lost my mom 14 years ago. Tremendous amount of suffering as I did her hospice. But it was also one of the greatest gifts to be there for her during the last few months of her life. Those things take EQ skills. They take resilience. They take us being really connected with our own affective or emotional state. Learning the language of emotion as a family can be a fun thing to learn and start integrating. So learning these labels that help us not just understand how we're feeling, but then communicate. You know, when I'm feeling really sad, I hope you ask me why I'm feeling sad, and maybe you offer to make me a cup of tea or sit with me and just listen to my sad feelings. You can create a feelings chair in your house where anybody that's having big feelings can go and have those feelings. It's when parents try to shut down certain feelings, like we don't do anger in this house. Well, that's not going to help because we all have anger. One of the things that we did a lot in our home was differentiate between being angry and being mean. You can always be angry. Being mean is not okay. So if you need to feel, or you're feeling angry, tell me why you're angry. And you can be angry at mom. Like, Mom, I'm angry. You won't let me go outside and play, or you can be angry at me. In fact, I want you to be able to say, I'm angry because of this. You can't be mean. There's no name calling. There's no hitting. Like, mean is different than anger. And by the way, anger is a part of grief and loss. So it's really important that we change, you know, how we're thinking about anger, and especially our children's anger. It's some of what our parents really struggled with because we weren't allowed to be angry, that we actually had to suppress our anger so it comes out in kind of sideways ways, sometimes passive aggressive, or comes out in all these funky ways. But I think often the minute we can change our relationship to our own anger and pain, things start to shift for us. So thinking about things that you can do to increase EQ skills by pulling the language of emotion into your home and family. So look at that, I'm only 3 minutes over. So that was really fun for me, wanting to take some questions from you guys, see if there are things that I can assist with. I did give you a bunch of articles. You have Children Learn What They Live, and you also have an article called What to Do with All That Anger. That would also be helpful if you have a kid in particular that struggles with a lot of anger. And again, happy to take some of your questions. Julianne, do I need to do anything to take any other questions?
If they just want to put them in the chat box.
Okay.
We have about 10 minutes if you guys want to ask any questions. A couple people have asked about the recording. It will go back out again. This was being recorded, so you'll get that.
Okay. So while they're coming up with questions, I'm going to give you guys some resources, okay? So the couple of them that are really helpful. So one, our book, our publisher, Sharon Roja and I wrote the 7 Core Issues in Adoption and Permanency. Our book is available here, but they have a ton of resources because their specialty is kind of our field in particular: adoption, foster care, children's mental health. So they have a brochure, and it's jessicakingsleypublishing.com, so you can really just even look them up. But this book has all different kinds of really helpful resources, workbooks for parents, for kids. Great resource. The next one I want to give you, when I did a quick walkthrough of attachment, any parents that struggle themselves with their own attachment history because of our own upbringing or our own relationships with our parents, like Our Attachment Dance Floor. This is one of my favorite books. It's a workbook. So you work your way into understanding your own attachment style and history. It's called Attachment: 60 Trauma-Informed Assessment and Treatment Interventions Across the Lifespan. So I know that's a long title, but hopefully you guys can get it after this. But it's a great workbook. I use it all the time. It's fabulous. One of my other favorite ones, because we're all hunkering down, and those of you that can't get to therapy or interested, maybe like, hey, I would love to get therapy or just have more insight into what's happening into my interior. It's one of my new favorite books. It's called Cheaper Than Therapy, and it's a workbook. It's a guided journal. Can you guys see this okay? A guided journal. And it basically walks you through all these different kind of clinical orientations, and you gain insight because you're answering all these questions in a really personal way. It's actually a really fun workbook to do. Again, it's called Cheaper Than Therapy, and it's a lot cheaper than therapy. Another resource is Fostering Families Today, one of my favorite periodicals. A lot of the articles that I sent you or reference or even on the core issues are in Fostering Families Today, along with other great articles, resources, very specifically for our parents in this community. And there's one more book called, well, actually I have a few more books. Mindful Monkey and Happy Panda. It's one of my favorite books, and I practice mindfulness myself, because if you think about learning to manage your mind state, it's a great skill because it allows you to be more present in the moment and stop any negative spiraling thoughts you may have. And this one is actually great to read with your children. And basically the essence is the monkey mind, whose mind is going everywhere, is never really in the moment. And the panda, who appears very happy and calm, and his mind is typically in the moment where he is. And it's this beautiful story of the monkey saying, well, why are you so happy, panda, and you look content and peaceful? And the panda says, well, I eat and I sleep and I work and I play. And the monkey says, well, I do that too. And the panda says, well, what are you doing when you do those things? And the monkey says, well, when I'm eating, I'm thinking about playing, and when I'm playing, I'm thinking about working, and when I'm working, I'm thinking about sleeping. And so what you hear is, he's never really where he is because he has trouble bringing his mind to this present moment. So the panda walks him through what he does, which is be fully present. So it's a great book. Julianne, any more questions, or do I keep going with some books that I have?
Keep going. Nobody's posted any.
No questions.
I like the books. I like the resources.
Oh, the books are great. Yes, I'm just giving you some of my favorites. So one of the things our kids really struggle with if they've had multiple attachment disruptions and relational trauma is this thing called unconditional love. They have trouble feeling it. They have trouble letting it in. So some of my favorite books on unconditional love, this is one of my favorite ones. It's called I Love You, Stinky Face. And it really is the child basically saying, well, what if I was a one-eyed cyclops and big and ugly? And the mother, the parent, consistently saying, nothing stops my love. Well, what if I was an octopus and, had 27 arms? And nothing stops my love. And again, our children really have trouble feeling that because of abandonment, rejection, or trauma. So these books that really send the message of unconditional love. This one's called I Love You Just the Way You Are. And so often our children struggle with that as well because they feel like they're not loved just the way they are. Sometimes, especially because we send a lot of messages that they need to change, or they've been in therapy 27 years. And by the way, our kids can get over-therapized with the wrong therapy. That's a whole other training, but over-therapized, because that over-therapizing, like there must be something wrong with me because I'm in therapy forever with 27 therapists and I still am broken or feel damaged. So making sure that we're not creating more attachment disruptions, because every time they change therapists, there's more grief and more loss. So at least we find really stable therapists that really are well versed in developmental trauma, because we have to have the activation of the deeper brain system. So really important to, not just do therapy for the sake of therapy, which, is a bad recipe.
Allison, I do
Yep.
have a couple questions.
Yes, yes. Good.
Okay. So one person wanted to know about how to help parents really kind of buy into this, because I think we're seeing this across the board with a lot of our families right now. I think because kids are kind of acting out during this time, and the parents are kind of hammering down and hammering down and hammering down. And how do we help them buy into this sort of different way of parenting and focusing on connection?
Yeah. So for us, I'm guessing that came from a professional,
I think so.
Julianne? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of start with this, because I always think about kind of the best way to answer a question like that. Our parents are very distressed, and it is our job as the professionals to attune with their needs. You know, it's like they're tugging on the string, like we're attuning with what they need so they can attune with what the child needs. There really won't be kind of one quick fix to help them buy into, like, oh, buy into this. Well, first of all, I'd probably send them at least this so they can hear. Lots of times, if you can walk them through kind of the science and the evidence, what we've learned from child development and the brain science, and walk them through and then integrate that into parenting, it makes more sense than if we just show up to their house and say, you know, here's a handout and try these things. I'm not saying we do that, but it's harder to get a buy-in. First of all, if we're not really in relationship, and I mean, if I'm the professional, I am in relationship with the parent, that it's my job to attune with what they need from me in the moment when they need it. So if they're here in toxic stress, I'm really joining them in that moment. And it's going to be different for every parent, because it's going to be based on their house, that parent's house. Think again, the self as a house. How are they experiencing this toxic stress? Because they're all going to be experiencing it in a different way. So I'm going to be, as the professional, doing that attunement with how's the parents perceiving what's happening and what's their biggest challenge. Their biggest challenge may be, I don't have good coping strategies myself as the parent, or there's not enough structure in the home, or my kid's angry all the time and is kicking a sister or hurting the dog. Or I'm going to do a good job as the professional making sure I'm very specific at attuning to what this parent needs from me. And that's often a stepwise process. So if I meet their need here, we can get to that next step here and here. I hope that helps. And really how I want the parents to hear that is, it's our job to meet your need as the professionals, therapists, social workers, wraparound folks, who's ever working with the families, that we want you to tell us what you need from us. And it's our job to attune with those needs and meet your needs so you can meet the child's needs.
Another question, Allison, was about what do you recommend for attaching to teens?
One of my favorite things are teens. By the way, those of you that are parenting teens, I just did this workshop on, you know, I call it when attaching and independence collide, and it really is kind of bringing some of the neuroscience, because it's pretty fascinating. That teen brain is going through a tremendous amount of reorganization, which means there's a brand new opportunity to really relearn some of these deeper patterns. So that's the good news. For our teens, we just may have to make it much safer for them, meaning go through the back door of the house. Hopefully there's no teens on the call. If they're in the room, like, you know, mute the speaker. You want to go through the back door of the house, because the front door is going to be locked and bolted with 57 bolts, right? So when I say go through the back door, you can't go through the front door meaning, hey, teenager, just tell me about how you're feeling about abandonment and trauma and this. And they're going to be like, where can I run to? Where can I hide? You know, front door is going to be locked. Going through the back door, let's say we're going to watch one of my favorite movies, Instant Family. Watch a movie, and then again, don't talk about them, talk about Lizzie. You know, what was Lizzie feeling when her mom didn't come back? Allow them to project their feelings into a movie or into a book or into a poem, or when they can project their feelings, again, that's what I say, kind of going through the back door, it's much safer for them because they don't feel as threatened or raw, like we're not having them feel like we're trying to be intrusive or come into their wound or their pain, especially if they're not ready for us to go there. So using kind of their language, again, like movies, you can use music. In fact, many of our teens are really musical or love music. Ask them to play their favorite song. Tell me what that song means to you. Tell me what lyrics pop out for you. How does that song make you feel? But kind of going to them, their modality, and then going through the back door, because again, we don't get anywhere if we're trying to break down that front door. I hope that helped.
Perfect. Okay, one more question, and this will be the last one. Just, and I'll condense this one, but it looks like we have a mom whose child is 3, not close, doesn't live in town. So working on attaching with a long distance relationship, what kind of thoughts or ideas do you have around that?
And how old is the child?
I don't know. If you're still on, Jessie, tell me how old she is. I'm thinking.
I'm just wondering if she's an adult or a teen, it would be a little different.
I'm thinking like 8 or 9, but I'm not sure. And she didn't respond, so I'm not sure.
Gotcha. So a couple things is if we're talking about a child, so I would get the invisible string book or any of the unconditional love book, but the invisible string, get a string, have your child get a string, like you're going to get a string and I'm going to get a string. And let's hold it up at the same time. And again, for children, you want to make it really concrete. Concrete things really help kids to anchor concepts. And because you're not with them, they can't feel you, touch you, see you, but having an object really does help. So
she's
if you
12,
get a string,
13. Sorry, she's 13, Allison. Go ahead.
Yeah. So parent gets a string, have your child go get a string, doesn't matter what color. Read her the book, The Invisible String. And at the end, again, the message, you haven't read it yet, but the message is that our hearts are always connected. My heart is always connected to your heart. So right now, I want you to tug on that string, tug mommy towards you, and mommy's going to tell you 5 things that I so love about you. So anytime you need mommy, tug on that string, and each time you have a conversation, let's say it's Skype or a Zoom conversation, pull out the string and have her tug, and you're going to move towards her with unconditional love, right? I love you just the way you are. But use the string to kind of the symbol of attachment, have her pull, and she's pulling you closer to her, and you send messages of unconditional love. Like, hold up your hand, I'm going to tell you 5 things I love about you, right? And make sure you're smart because you aced that test, or you're so artistic, you drew me that picture the other day. Really specific things to help her feel your love, that string of attachment, because it is harder for kids. We just have to get a little creative. There's one more website I want to give all of you guys that I've gotten a lot of my resources with. So when I say use things in the house to bring the language of emotion into the house, one of the very first things you can do, and it's pretty cheap to do because they're only like, I think they're like 10 bucks, but there's a website called childswork.com. A lot of therapists use it, but parents use it as well, childswork.com. And you can get a deck of feelings cards. And those feelings cards have either pictures of faces or emojis and all the different feelings. And you can play Go Fish or Concentration. Remember when you pick a pair? When you get a pair, and let's say I'm playing with my child. And by the way, you can do this long distance. If your child's somewhere else, get them a card and you a card, and you can do it together. When you pick a feeling, let's say I get a pair that says sad. I have to talk about a time I felt sad. Well, the time I was sad was when my kitty's Snowball died when I was 12, and I cried and cried and cried. I'm going to actually pick things in my own life if I'm the parent that my child can relate to. When my child picks angry or happy or excited, they have to talk about a time they felt those feelings. So what we're doing is we're playing a game, but we're really teaching the dance of EQ, that my child has to listen to my feelings, and then I get to listen to their feelings. And by the way, you'll learn an awful lot about your children, because they're not always thinking about sharing certain feelings, especially if the child's new to you, if they've just come into your home. and you can play it over and over again. It's a really great, inexpensive way to start talking about feelings. And what I find is children love to play this game, especially with their parents, because they're learning about your childhood. They learn something new about you. So it's a great way to be teaching this language of affect and emotion through play. Any other questions, Julianne?
Julianne, you're muted.
Haha, I was muted. Sorry. Technical difficulties. No other questions. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Allison. That was fabulous. I love all the
So I want
resources.
to wrap up. Thank you, Julianne. Well, I want to thank Aspiranet and happy birthday, Julianne and
Thank
Shane.
you.
I mean, every one of our parents out there and professionals out there who are just doing your best to reduce all that toxic stress. It really is up to all of us. I'm going to close with my favorite poem, just it becomes kind of a blessing for all of us to kind of use this time to grow and to heal. A lot of us have old wounds to grow and to heal through this time. It does create opportunities for that. And it's my favorite one. I read the last time, but it really is my mantra right now. I'm reading it every morning. And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played and learned new ways of being and were still. And they listened more deeply. Some meditated, some prayed, some danced, and some sang. Some met their shadows, and the people began to think differently, and the people healed. Many blessings to all of you. Thanks so much for all that you do, and take good care.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Allison. You're always
You're
fabulous.
welcome. Bye, guys. Thanks so much.
Bye.